Okay, ladies and gentlemen, video number 2 in the series. First essay, Good and Evil, Good and Bad, Section 1. The English psychologists are no mean posers of riddles. What are these English psychologists really after? One finds them always, whether intentionally or not, engaged in the same task of pushing into the foreground the nasty part of the psyche. Pausing for a second, I thought that was Freud's job, really, but continuing. Looking for the effective motive forces of human development in the very last place we would wish to have found them. For example, in the inertia of habit, in forgetfulness, in the blind and fortuitous association of ideas. Always in something that is purely passive, automatic. So what are the motive forces of mankind? And he's saying the English philosophers are always saying that the things that motivate mankind, our motive force, our real basic value, is some sort of passive, automatic, reflexive, molecular, and moreover profoundly stupid thing, something like that. What drives these psychologists forever in the same direction? A secret malicious desire to belittle humanity, which they do not acknowledge even to themselves? Is that what it is? Now, I think that's basically the left today. They desire to belittle and destroy humanity, and maybe they don't even admit it to themselves. But so little has changed in time. So if you think on this and you think that he saw these things happening in the society around him, and then what followed 30 years later, the beginning of a great, enormous, long war, and our society is developing along the exact same lines. History isn't so far away as we suppose. And when we get, 20, 30 years from now, if we're in a situation where Europe's in right now, and it's legal again to beat women, and it's illegal for women to be on their own outside of the home, if that's half of the Western world, then what kind of a world do we live in? You haven't gone forward in history. We think about progress and things getting better and so on, but we still live in the real nitty-gritty world. All right. A pessimistic distrust, a suspiciousness of the soured idealist, some petty resentment of Christianity and Plato, which does not rise above the threshold of consciousness. Or could it be a prurient taste for whatever is embarrassing, painfully paradoxical, dubious, and absurd in existence? Pausing for a moment. Yeah, I think that there's a lot of that. I think that a lot of the people on the left find something that is, from the prurient tastes or embarrassing. Because it's more headline catching to say, could it be that all of our moral drives are due to the fact that we forget things? Right? It's the forgetting. It's the letting go that makes morality. You can imagine, I heard it in college. I know these people say these things. But to find something that's not admirable and to aim all of humanity's meaning at that, he says that that's what the English psychologists do. And is it the English psychologists? Because like I said, I thought it was Freud. But continuing. Or is it perhaps a kind of stew? A little meanness, a little bitterness, a little bit of anti-Christianity, a touch of prurience, and a desire for condiments. That's probably what it is, a bit of everything, huh? But again, people tell me that these men are simply dull old frogs who hop and creep in and around man, as in their own element, as though man were a bog. However, I am reluctant to listen to this. In fact, I refuse to believe it. And if I may express a wish where I cannot express a conviction, I do wish wholeheartedly that things may be otherwise with these men, that these microscopic examiners of the soul may be really courageous, magnanimous, and proud animals, who know how to contain their emotions and have trained themselves to subordinate all wishful thinking to the truth, any truth, even a homespun, severe, ugly, obnoxious, unchristian, unmoral truth. For such truths do exist. Okay. So he ends, that's the end of that first section. So this is a good start to this essay. This is meaty, very meaty so far. There are truths which are homespun, severe, ugly, unchristian, and unmoral. Okay? And yet it's true. So this is maybe something that we should give some thought. All right, now I have a section where we're going to read quite a bit, and it pays off at the end, so stick with me through this. All honor to the beneficent spirits that may motivate these historians of ethics. One thing is certain, however, they have been quite deserted by the true spirit of history. They all, to a man, think unhistorically, as is the age-old custom among philosophers. The amateurishness of their procedure is made plain from the very beginning, when it is a question of explaining the provenance of the concept and judgment, good. And now he quotes these English thinkers. Quote, Originally they decree, altruistic actions were praised and approved by the recipients, that is, by those to whom they were useful. Later on, the origin of that praise having been forgotten, such actions were felt to be good simply because it was the habit to commend them. End quote of the English guy. Back to Nietzsche. We notice at once that this first derivation has all the earmarks of the English psychologist's work. Here are the key ideas of utility, forgetfulness, habit, and error, seen as lying at the root of that value system, which civilized man had hitherto regarded with pride as the prerogative of all men. So we take so much great pride in our moral system, which separates us from the monkeys and the animals and the bears. And yet, the English are saying, oh, this whole moral system that you speak so highly of is just something that was originally done because somebody was doing something to somebody else and they liked that, and now we've forgotten why that happened, and so we just remember the fact that we like the fact that they did it that way. Very forgetful. They use utility and forgetfulness together gives us what was hitherto regarded with pride as the prerogative of all men. So they are really spitting on what is a very important thing. But continuing, this pride must now be humbled, these values devalued. Have the debunkers succeeded? Now, if this is really an accomplishment, if human morality is really an accomplishment, then to debase it and say, oh, it all comes from a mistake and force of habit. Once you've debased it, then you can question it and replace it. Okay. Now it is obvious to me, first of all, that their theory looks for the genesis of the concept good in the wrong place. The judgment good does not originate with those to whom the good has been done. Right? So where does the judgment of good come from? Now, an objectivist says that something good is something that benefits your life. But Nietzsche is not like that. He is looking at good as a Platonic, floating ideal. He's a Platonist in this respect. He believes in a good as some sort of metaphysical other thing or something, some metaphysical realm. And he said earlier he stopped looking for bad behind the world and now sees it in the world. And he should do the same with good. It's rather late now, though. Okay. Rather, it was the good themselves, that is to say the noble, mighty, highly placed, and high-minded, who decreed themselves and their actions to be good. So our original idea comes from the aristocracy saying the things we do are good, i.e., belonging to the highest rank, in contradistinction to all that was base, low-minded, and plebeian. It was only this pathos of distance that authorized them to create values and name them. What was utility to them? Right. For the aristocracy to say it's useful, morality means to be useful, they don't care about that. They're the aristocracy. Morality is something more noble than usefulness. You see how far this has gone awry? I mean, for an objectivist, it's like an unfolding train wreck of origami or something. But it's probably really juicy for people today who don't know what ethics are. And, we're mining it for the good stuff in between here and there. But what we're doing is we're looking at Nietzsche's thoughts on where morality came from. So this is a good thought exercise, particularly for those who know and understand ethics and where it comes from. Okay, the notion of utility seems singularly inept to account for such a quick jetting forth of supreme value judgments. Now, pausing for a second, why does he say it was such a quick jetting forth of supreme value judgments? He thinks that values, morals came about, were created at some point in some period of history, and he describes it as quick and jetting forth. I would say that we probably developed our morals, our innate sense of right and wrong, which is by no means something we can run society on, but it, like Christopher Hitchens said, the Jews wandering around in the deserts never would have made it to the foot of Mount Sinai for the Ten Commandments to be given to them unless they already knew that stuff was wrong. So they weren't wandering around in the desert, and then Moses says, "Thou shalt not kill," and they went, "Really? That was our favorite thing to do up until now." So we have some sort of innate morals in our society, which is just some sort of cultural system to let us get along enough so that we can reproduce and live. And it's not that great, and it's not that stable, but it's all we have. And he says it came about very quickly, and I don't think that's the case. I think it took tens of thousands of years. Continuing, here we come face to face with the exact opposite of the lukewarmness with which every scheming prudence and utilitarian calculus presupposes, and not for a time only, for the rare exceptional hour, but permanently. The origin of the opposite good and bad is to be found in the pathos of nobility and distance, representing a dominant temper of a higher ruling class in relation to a lower dependent one. There's his thesis of what the root of good and bad is that it comes from nobility. Quote, "The lordly right of bestowing names is such that one would almost be justified in seeing the origin of language itself as an expression of the ruler's power. They say this or that. They seal off each thing and action with a sound and thereby take symbolic possession of it." Now, we can probably just set that aside and not worry about that. That's really weird, and I think that's linguistic analysis, and I think that sort of stuff had turned later on into Wittgenstein and nonsense. But it's a fun suggestion. Such an origin would suggest that there is no a priori necessity for associating the word good with altruistic deeds, as the moral psychologists are fond of claiming. Woo, what if good and altruism were separated? Do you see why once in a while people say Nietzsche and Rand are, something similar? Though they're not. Whatever, let's not go into that. In fact, it is only after aristocratic values have begun to decline that the egotism-altruism dichotomy takes possession of the human conscience. To use my own terms, it is the herd instinct that now asserts itself. Yet it takes quite a while for this instinct to assume such sway that it can reduce all moral valuations to that dichotomy, as is currently happening throughout Europe, where the prejudice equating the term moral, altruistic, and disinterested has assumed the obsessive force of an idea fix. So, that's an important bit there. The decline of the aristocratic values leads to the egoism-altruism dichotomy taking control of the conscience, and the herd instinct asserts itself. Now, the herd morality is different from the aristocratic morality. The herd morality sees that doing good to everyone is the right thing to do. The aristocratic morality is doing the right action is the right thing to do. So it's different to do this thing which is good versus doing something that helps everyone. Those are the two choices, sort of. The herd morality is doing good that helps everyone rather than doing a value or an action which is good by itself. Now, go on a bit here. This is now part 3, section 3 of this essay. Quite apart from the fact, this hypothesis about the origin of the value judgment good is historically untenable, its psychology is intrinsically unsound. Altruistic deeds were originally commended for their usefulness, but this original reason has now been forgotten, so the claim goes. How is such forgetting conceivable? Has there ever been a point in history at which such deeds lost their usefulness? Quite the contrary. This usefulness has been apparent to every age, a thing that has been emphasized over and over again. Therefore, instead of being forgotten, it must have impressed itself on the consciousness with ever-increasing clearness. So whatever the root of morality is still here and still with us and very clear and very alive. It isn't something that we establish morality and now we've forgotten the reasons for it, but it's still there. The opposite theory is far more sensible, though this does not necessarily make it any truer. The theory held by Herbert Spencer, for example, who considers the concept good qualitatively the same as the concept useful or practical, so that in the judgment good and bad, humanity is said to have summed up and sanctioned precisely its unforgotten and unforgettable experiences of the useful, practical, and the harmful, impractical. According to this theory, the good is that which all along has proved itself useful, and therefore may lay the highest claim to be considered valuable. As I have said, the derivation of this theory is suspect, but at least the explanation is self-consistent and psychologically tenable within its limits. So he just goes off at the end and says, I'm not sure, it's suspect. But it was... So he's pointing at utilitarianism there. And then he criticizes it at the end. And he sort of criticizes a bit throughout. But his criticism's pretty scant. And at the end he basically just says that it seems self-consistent and tenable within its limits. So was Nietzsche a utilitarian? He seems to have flirted with it and been very, very tempted by it. All right, next on to section 4.